At an event like World Time Attack, we are more used to seeing really high-end builds that have had potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars poured into them. And while that is great, it's certainly an end of the market that's not that achievable for most of us at the enthusiast level. So we're here with Andrew from SX Developments to talk about a more budget-focused build. Now, Andrew, while we're talking about a budget build here, you actually spend most of your World Time Attacks helping out Under Suzukis S15, the Scorch Racing S15, which is anything but a budget build. He's not here this year, so has that given you the opportunity to stretch your legs in your own car for a change?
Yeah, it was a bit of a thing. I'd run mostly track days at Wakefield Park, and then World Time Attack invited me to run as a bit of a late entry, and I thought, well, it's a good opportunity to do it. It's more expensive than a normal track day, but it's a cool thing to do, a bit different.
Talking about the car, it's a 180 SX quite clearly, but can you give us a bit of a history? How did you come to own the car, and what's sort of been the development of it?
So I bought the car as a rolling shell, cheap. It had some of the bits on it, some suspension bits, carbon doors, plastic windows, and a roll cage. So then I just put an engine that I'd built for my daily driver into it, and a NASCAR Jericho gearbox that I'd bought for $500 in a box of pieces and rebuilt. And then sort of spiraled out of control, ended up converting the engine to dry sump using also old NASCAR parts, and went a bit more fancy on the aero than I was planning to originally, but sort of ended up as a pretty good package.
All right, let's come back and just unpack some of those elements you just talked about. We'll start with the SR20, and it's an engine that is very popular, but particularly for racing applications, it's not without its own set of issues. So can you talk to us about the spec of the engine and what you've done to it?
So the engine's a pretty basic build. It's got a set of Wiseco forged pistons, a set of second-hand Eagle rods. The bore was a bit oversized, so it's a bit rattly. And then the first shakedown I did on this, I threw a rocket arm, which is, everyone says, yep, told you so, but I've never had that happen before. So then I've ended up having to fix that, and I upgraded the cams, new valve springs, and kind of beefed it up a little bit more to be a bit more reliable. But it's not being pushed super hard, I don't rev it super high, so I tried to keep it a little bit reliable.
Definitely some of the two key problems around the rocker reliability come down to the RPM ceiling you're using, and also staying away from using ignition cuts. Are you doing anything else to keep the rockers reliable?
So the ignition cut was the thing that killed it the first time. I never liked that, and I didn't use it, but I was told that time that it's all good, and it wasn't. So the other thing is, reasonably high boost with the valve springs need to be really stiff. I also changed to a dual guide shim setup, so that it's just a little bit less likely for the rockets to come loose, and basically just very carefully set all the clearances. So I did the clearances multiple times, made sure everything's in spec, and I don't rev it super high, and I use a fuel cut rev limit, and just try and be a little bit careful.
Now, I'll just sort of dive into that for those who are maybe watching and don't really understand why an ignition cut would be a no-no. And what tends to happen there is that when we use an ignition cut, we've got a cylinder full of unburned fuel, and air makes its way into the exhaust where it can explode, which is why we get the pops and bangs when we're using an ignition cut. The problem with that on the SR20 is that creates a pressure spike in the exhaust manifold, and that can be enough to pop the exhaust valve back off its seat. Then the rocker loses control or contact, and the rest is often expensive history. So just wanted to get that in there. Okay, so in terms of power and boost pressure, what are you sort of at there?
So it runs about 1.7, 1.8 bar, 25 psi-ish. And what was the other bit?
How much power are you getting at that sort of boost level?
The important thing. 360 real world kilowatts, so it's about 480 horsepower, and it's the power band is quite wide, so it's probably from 5,000 to 7.5. It makes that much power. It's kind of at the limit of the turbo the whole time.
And what is that turbocharger?
It's a Kinugawa TD06 SL220G with a billet wheel and the sort of EFR style blower valve in the compressor cover.
Okay, so, I mean, what I'm hearing here is that you've pieced together a combination without breaking the bank in any one area, but you've still got something that's producing good power, albeit not stratospheric. You've got a wide power band, which obviously is going to help with the drivability of the car. Is that sort of a reasonable way of summing it up?
Yeah. So the idea was that the turbo, I think it was $800 or something delivered, so it was pretty cheap upgrade from basic old stuff that I'd been running, and it ends up making enough power that it's a fast car, especially when it's light, but it's it's not crazy. We're not running like into the limits of con rods or the bearing caps and that sort of thing.
And hence you can stay away from needing some of those more expensive upgrades like billet caps or better quality con rods.
Yeah. So it just kind of stay within that limit, and also the drivetrain. So standard axles, standard R200 diff setup, and everything. It's reliable at that sort of power level, especially on a light car.
Now you mentioned that you've dry sumped it, and when people watching this hear the term dry sump, they're probably seeing dollar signs, and it wouldn't be uncommon to spend $5,000 or $6,000, maybe even more, doing a dry sump setup. So you call this a budget build, but it's dry sumped. What parts do you use? You mentioned sort of NASCAR second-hand parts, but what parts do you use? And can you give us a rundown on sort of approximately what money went into that dry sump setup?
Yeah, so the original sort of setup was basically it's a Weaver Brothers pump, 3-stage, which is the same as a stock car products pump, and they're reasonably cheap, even new, like $1,300 US. I bought it. I think I bought the pump, the tank, and a lot of lines and fittings and everything for a few $100s delivered from the States. And then I bought an oil pan, which was an older model, like X-Display high octane pan, for a few $100s. And otherwise I was going to just modify the factory pan, but this popped up, was nice and easy. And I did end up spending probably $1,000 or so on plumbing, not all for the dry sump, but also the fuel system. And then I had a slight leak on the original pump, and I pulled it apart, found that it's sealed with silicone rather than having O-rings and everything, and I thought, this is going to give me trouble. And I ended up buying a cheap but new pump and had all new problems with that, but eventually got it all sorted.
All right, so it sounds like a bit of Aussie ingenuity, and maybe scouring eBay and being a little bit careful on what you're buying has given you what could have been a really expensive setup for cents on the dollar.
Yeah, I've had auto searches on eBay for things that I want, and some things I found pretty quickly. Some things took me 6 months or a year. One of those was the sequential shift mechanism for the gearbox. Extremely rare. I found out about it. They were pretty expensive new, and apparently still available at the time. Put an auto search on eBay. I think it took about a year, and then one popped up for $150, fairly local, and I clicked it as fast as I could click it. And even the gearbox, it was... I'd talked to a few people, and they said, maybe have a look for a Jericho box or something in the USA. And I searched on eBay for NASCAR gearbox or something, and one popped up for $500 in a box of pieces, but it was in Australia. I'd accidentally searched on Australian eBay and not US eBay, so clicked very fast on that one as well. And then I eventually got a different gear set for it, sort of pieced together on eBay, different gears and spare parts for it, and rebuilt it.
I mean, most people, just like the dry sump, when you're talking about upgraded gearboxes and particularly dog engagement gearboxes for motorsport use, you're sort of starting to talk usually numbers, north of about $10,000, maybe well over that if you're starting to go sequential. So you're into this gearbox, albeit not in factory form a sequential, but you've converted it with that shifter mechanism. So you've now got a sequential dog engagement gearbox for under $1,000.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it only has 4 gears, and it won't shift as fast as a really proper sequential gearbox, but it's pretty fast, pretty strong. It's very light and compact, so it just kind of works well in the package.
All right, let's talk about the electronics in the car, because managing the engine is obviously critical to getting the power out of it, as well as ensuring some reliability. So what have you got in there in terms of engine management and driver displays, etc.?
So I cheated a little bit on the budget with the ECU. I won it in a competition, not one of your competitions, but a haltech local competition, and that sort of saved money. It sort of didn't, because it meant that I had to upgrade a bunch of other stuff. So it cost a fair bit to do all the wiring, and I needed to change the dash data logger setup to work with that, because my old setup was not compatible. So it's a Haltech Elite 2500 ECU, which is probably overkill for what I'm doing, but it works. It does the job. It's good. And the data logger, I've had I think 5 different random old setups in there over the years, most of which never even saw the track. And it currently has an older model MoTeC ADL3, which was lent to me. So.
The ADL3, older but still a very capable logger, and obviously you can still use the same data analysis software that MoTeC currently use on their newer generation of dashes, correct?
Yeah, it's actually quite nice. It does everything you could want, and it's customizable CAN messaging, so that you can get data you can get all of the ECU channels into it, whereas the previous dash I ran was an old AM MXL Pro, and which was actually really nice. I really liked it, but the CAN bus in that is not customizable. So it only supported an old Haltech protocol. So a lot of the channels that are available in the newer Haltech firmware are not available in that dash.
It really limits what you can actually input into the dash and display.
Yeah, and I like, it costs a lot to go to the track, and whereas it doesn't cost anything to look at data and play with nerd stuff at home. So I like to do that in between events, and having more data, more sensors, that sort of thing is kind of cheap entertainment compared to the actual racing.
Talking about that nerd element, and I share that passion as well. Looking at data, for me, more data is always better. You can never have enough. So I'm interested, like, what are your key metrics that you're looking at in terms of sort of developing the car, developing your driving, and knowing where you can actually go faster?
So at the moment, it's good having as much engine data as you can get, because you can really keep an eye on things, make sure everything's behaving well. And for driving, I like having a steering sensor. So basically I have brake pressure, steering, I have damper pots, which were another second-hand random buy. And of course the accelerometers in the dash. So you can get a lot of information from that, and being able to compare different laps, you can really see where you should be able to improve, or you can at least see where the limits should be. So it does take a while to find those limits, especially if the car's pretty fast.
All right, look, Andrew, I think it sounds like we've got some cars starting up in the background that's going to make it pretty hard for us to talk very soon. So I appreciate your time there. It is an impressive build, given that it hasn't been done with a massive budget. As we finish off, could you give us sort of a rough idea of how much money in total you think you've put into this car so far?
So the car in general, it's basically built for less than $20,000, but there's a few extra expenses for World Time Attack, some of the safety gear and things, which may or may not be included in that, depending on how you calculate it. So
anyway you look at that, the package you put together for $20,000 is incredible value for money. So hopefully those watching this video will maybe understand that with a bit of creative shopping on eBay, it doesn't always need to break the bank in order to build a fast, fun and competitive car. Thanks for your time, and good luck for the rest of the day.
No worries, thanks a lot.
If you like that video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you're not already a subscriber, make sure you're subscribed. We release a new video every week. And if you like free stuff, we've got a great deal for you. Click the link in the description to claim your free spot to our next live lesson.